So, can control the world? In many cases, not actually. We can force it, but we shouldn't do it. That's kind of my take-home message. We're now living in an age of big data. Within just 1 minute, 700,000 Google queries are being sent, 500,000 Facebook posts, and as we go shopping, as we move around, that all creates data, big data, and we can do a lot of things with them, good things. And it has created a dream. Chris Anderson's dream was that if we just had enough data, the truth would basically reveal itself. We wouldn't take science anymore to understand what is the best thing to do, and then it should just be done. So the idea of the benevolent big data was created, and in fact, governments and also companies started to collect a lot of data, as much data as they could get. Then the question came up, can we know everything that's going on in the world in any place in real time? And can we maybe even create something like a crystal ball that allows us to predict what will be going on in the future? And in fact, the military has been working on this, and a number of companies have been working on this. CERN is working on this, and the question also came up, with so much information, could we take optimal decisions and basically rule the world like a wise king or a benevolent dictator? And some people have started to ask, in particular in the Silicon Valley, is democracy an outdated technology? Can we actually run society like a giant machine? Well, if we wanted to do that, then basically we would need to know what are all those pieces that make up society, how they interact and how they can be manipulated. And in fact, there are some companies that are working on an operating system for society, not just computers and smartphones. Among them, IBM has created this Watson cognitive computer, a wonderful technology, of course, but it was proposed it should run for president. And Google actually wants to reprogram the state. So we need to take care, because the people behind this also say things like, there are a lot of things that we'd like to do, but unfortunately we can't do them because they're illegal. Now, my recent book is actually addressing this trend to automize things, factories, cars, and most likely society. And it compares two kinds of automation. One, top-down control, the other one, basically bottom-up self-organization, and how to facilitate that. Now, I'll start with the top-down control approach. How does it work? Well, basically, you use machine learning, such as deep learning, and you run it on data. It's actually our data, big data about your personal life. This data has been collected by a lot of companies, and then basically these algorithms figure out what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how your behavior can be manipulated. And Google was among the first companies to develop this for personalized advertisement. And so basically, they do a lot of experiments with us, millions a day, to figure out how we can be made to click a certain link and buy certain kind of products and these kind of things. So they're trying to program people in a sense. And that brings us into a situation that we're increasingly remotely controlled, and this is also a concept that's becoming more and more interesting for politics. So the question is, can we control society? Can we control behavior? And the talking is about nudging, big nudging, when we combine behavioral economics with big data. Now it turns out that nudging can change your behavior, but it cannot make us all behave healthy and be slim and be nice to our environment. So it's not as efficient as they'd like it to be, and therefore kind of stronger reinforcement mechanisms are being developed, such as personalized pricing, so reward and punishment mechanisms, and citizen scores, where basically everything that you do or don't do would get plus or minus points. Being tested in China right now, but there's a similar program in UK called Karma Police. And so basically, whatever you do, whatever link you click and whether your political opinion is compatible with the government's opinion, whether you pay your loans on time, whom you interact with, and all that will be evaluated, and the score will determine what kind of jobs you get, what interest rate you have to pay, and also what are the countries that you can travel to. So this is really George Orwell, Big Brother, combined with the Brave New World. And certainly it can force people to do certain kind of things, but does it create a better society? And the thinking is that basically we could now shape societies to do certain things, and we could also identify those people who would oppose those changes that the government likes to reach, and that takes us to predictive policing. And it goes so far that now algorithms are trying to determine who might do something wrong or might disturb public order. So you don't have to do anything wrong, just the likelihood or the possibility might be enough to put you to prison or take you out of the system or impose some constraints on you. Not only what you are doing, but also your social contacts, your friends, your neighbors, and so on. So it's a completely different kind of society. This kind of society is being announced as the future. And it's said that this is basically what big data implies, and science is being misused to support this kind of vision of the future. And I think our society is now at a crossroads where we need to make up our minds how we want to live in future, because if we would let this happen, then we might lose everything, such as freedom and self-determination, human dignity, assumed innocence, fairness, justice, pluralism, democracy, participation, and also most likely peace and potentially our jobs because of automation. And in fact, this is not just a theoretical threat. We've seen that democracies have been turned into other forms of government gradually. That has happened in Hungary. This is actually a data-driven society. I know the people who are behind this. It's happening in Turkey, it's happening in Poland, and also in France. And I would say also democracy in other countries has become really unstable. And so it's time to speak up and defend this system, because I still believe it's the best system if we now upgrade it with digital means. I'm not arguing against technology. I'm arguing for a different use of this technology. So I'd like to say stop to this model, in particular because it has been promised to us that this big nudging and behavioral control would be used to make us behave more healthy, be more healthy, more environmental friendly, and so on. But in fact, what is happening is that most of the time it's being used to make us drink unhealthy stuff and to manipulate elections and so on. And that has happened to an extent that even the father of nudging, Cass Sunstein, is now about to publish a new book, and I think the title page on the right tells you basically what are his concerns. In fact, there has been a quite controversial discussion recently about all these attempts to manipulate emotions and behavior. There was a public outbreak about what Facebook was doing. Also, Facebook has been criticized for censoring views, manipulating news streams. It's being said that it's also supporting extremism. Even the state authority is taking care of this now. In the same way, Google has been claimed for interfering with the election, and it has been found that Google algorithms are actually discriminating against women and also against colored people. So there are a lot of problems, and the question comes up, are the right people actually in prison? If you read this, US Attorney General Eric Holder said, given that there were about 45 million arrests concerned with the war on drugs, too many Americans go to too many prisons for far too long and for no truly good law enforcement reason. You see it in the statistics over here. It's not China, it's not Russia that has most people in prison, it's the United States. So, no wonder Tim Cook from Apple comes up with an alternative approach. He is actually criticizing Google and Facebook, not just me. And he said, okay, it's time to protect privacy of users, of customers, and he's getting serious about it, and has come up now with this differential privacy approach that allows for personalization while protecting your privacy. And also, by the way, Elon Musk shares my point of view. So, in order to undermine this government control approach in a top-down way, he invested $1 billion into OpenAI with the purpose to make artificial intelligence an instrument of our personal will and to spread it more democratically. And finally, for those who are religious, also Pope Francis has spoken up. He is actually demanding a Europe 2.0. A new European humanism is asking, what's up with you, humanistic Europe? You defender of human rights, democracy, and freedom. Well, I think it's really a wrong understanding of big data, and that the Jews would follow from it, and a benevolent dictator approach would be needed in order to reach the best results. So I've looked into the economic development of Hungary. I told you before, there is this data-driven approach, and Orban might consider himself as a benevolent dictator, who knows? Anyway, this is where Hungary stands today. This is where it was before. So it started off as the leading country, it ended off as last. Now, why is this not working? I mean, it sounds so plausible. If you have more data, then you gain more knowledge. If you have more knowledge, you have more power, and you would be more successful. And it sounds plausible to optimize the world, but in fact, optimization leads to a decelerating growth curve. So at some point in time, you have reached the optimal state, and you can't go beyond it. And I think it's the wrong paradigm for society. The right kind of paradigm would be evolution or co-evolution. And that creates actually an accelerating growth curve, an exponential growth curve. Now, have a look at the world economy, and we'll see we really have this saturation that you would expect from an optimization approach. And I think this is the problem, and we need to have a totally different approach now, which is oriented as an open information ecosystem. And this is also something that has been articulated in this open letter on the digital economy that the MIT has triggered, and there are many high-level names that have signed this letter, because it turns out that even though the information technology sector has exploded, it hasn't created the macroeconomic overall growth that was expected. And so something is wrong with that top-down control approach, which is dominated by a few IT monopolies. And we need to have this more participatory information ecosystem approach. An idea that's now spreading in many countries, including the United States. And in fact, the White House has been pushing recently for much more participatory, bottom-up initiatives such as citizen science, and also the initiative A Nation of Makers shows that they're now totally changing their paradigm. And anyway, this approach hasn't solved our biggest problem so far, which is climate change, the financial crisis, conflict and war, and also that lack of sustainability. That means likely future resource shortages. And not even have they come up with the most livable city in the world. So if you look into the top 10 list of most livable cities, none of the big IT nations are on there. Right? So I advise that we use data and big data, but we use it in a different way, not in the sense of a black box society. And the reason for it is as follows. Even though we have now an exponentially increasing processing power, as Moore's law says it's doubling every 18 months approximately, data volume increases much faster than that. It doubles every 12 months. That means within just 1 year, we produce as much data as in all the years before in the entire history of humankind. And it means that this gap between the data that we produce and the data that we can process is opening up ever more. So that's kind of dark data that we can never process. And that means we need science to decide what share of the data to process and how to process it. So that science is back. And that has been considered by Chris Anderson and all the followers of him. The next point is digitization also means we network the world. So basically we're connecting companies and people more and more and more. And that creates actually a combinatorial explosion of complexity. That's the red curve. And it overtakes even the data volume. And it means that basically top-down control works less and less well. We need a new control paradigm, which is basically a distributed control paradigm. If you have listened to the talks at the last World Economic Forum, the conclusion basically is we've lost control of the world, and the praxis has reinforced that impression, of course. So we really need to talk about complex systems, right? Which we need to understand much better. So one conclusion, society cannot be steered like a car. It's not a mechanical system. It's an evolutionary system. Noise is important, and interactions are important. And these interactions can produce unexpected outcomes, emergent phenomena such as these phantom traffic jams that you see over here. And even if we could read the minds of all people, I mean, if we had the perfect mass surveillance system, we could not prevent the traffic jams. We would just see them happen. Why can I say that? Because we have mathematical formulas that allow us to understand these stop-and-go waves, and there's no need to know much about psychology. So we don't need to read minds. The only thing that matters is that above a certain threshold of the density, small variations in the speeds will actually be amplified, and it creates a domino or cascading effect that creates a situation that nobody wants. Now, these are people that all have modern technology, all the data that seems to be necessary to accomplish the task. They're well educated, they have a driver's license, they want to avoid this, and it's still happening. And it's a prime example of a system that is systemically unstable. Those systems show that property, that even if you have the very best intentions, things can go totally wrong. And we did also an experiment in the lab where we were able to predict an incredible number of 96% of all decisions. So that's kind of unheard of accuracy in social experiments. Still, the deterministic model that did the predictions was unable to predict actually the macroscopic outcome. That means the overall result, which looks very different. Next surprise is, if you add some noise, it means make your model less accurate. It actually predicts the macro outcome much better. And this is the kind of noise that causes unpredictable things. I'm just doing many presentations on my laptop, or some remote control windows. And back we are. So the reason why adding noise is actually producing more accurate macro predictions is that small deviations can trigger cascade effects that cause completely different kinds of outcomes. Right? So we don't need to know about every single person's behavior. We don't need that mass surveillance basically to come up with good macro prediction. That's the only thing that we should care about actually. And all the things where systems get out of control basically have this feature that a small perturbation will amplify and create cascading effects, and that will eventually mess up the entire system. So it's all about stable versus unstable systems, and altogether it's advised to avoid unstable systems in most cases and to develop a stable system with some exceptions. And while this is of course a funny experiment for a rainy weekend, very similar dynamics can be found actually in financial markets. I'm showing you here a movie that has produced by Frank Schweitzer and his team. Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, as you know, and created a cascade of bankruptcies all over the United States. Hundreds of banks failed, created losses of hundreds of billions of dollars. So again, systemic instability. And I like to say with Albert Einstein, we cannot solve our problems with the same kind of thinking that created them. Most of the big unsolved problems of the world are those related to systemic instability. So we need to understand this thing, and we need to have explanatory models in the sense of science where we have microscopic rules, interaction rules between individuals or companies, and then explain microphenomena from that, as we've done it in physics, elementary particle physics, for example. And there have been some nice success stories in the past. So I'll show you some of our work we've done in this area of complexity science. And one of these areas is pedestrian flows in crowd dynamics. And in fact, the interesting thing is that when people interact with each other, they create macro phenomena by self-initiation. Here you find this formation of lanes of uniform working direction. I mean that different directions of motions are separating from each other. And that can be simulated in a computer. It just basically takes higher relative velocity between the people moving into opposite directions to separate those streams of people. But that's not the only macroscopic self-condensation phenomena that we find. There are also oscillatory flows at bottlenecks, and there's the stride formation phenomenon in crossing flows. And all of that can be explained with one simple model, the social force model that has been inspired by physics but adapted to social behavior. And you have an equation of motion there and an acceleration equation. That acceleration equation actually contains a number of different terms that describes different motivations of a pedestrian, for example, to adjust the speed to a certain desired speed, to walk into a certain desired direction of motion, to keep some distance to other people, described by repulsive forces, and so on and so on. And so that has been quite successful, not only in qualitatively reproducing phenomena that we find, but we've also done experiments, we've done video tracking studies and all these kind of things, and we have applied the knowledge we've gained on practical challenges, such as the Muslim pilgrimage. And as you know, in the past there have been many crowd disasters, and for that reason the Saudi Arabian government has actually asked for help. Now, this is Mecca over here with the Holy Mosque. This is Mina with a tent camp for about 1.5 million people, and here's the Jamarat Bridge. That's actually the old one. And on the Jamarat Bridge there are a number of pillars representing the temptation by the devil, and you have to demonstrate that you resist this temptation and throw little stones at those pillars. Now, in this old system, there were many crowd disasters, and in fact it turns out that there's a transition from smooth flow to stop-and-go flows under certain kind of conditions that was very unexpected to find, and it's kind of an advanced warning sign of potential trouble to come. And then we found another unexpected transition to crowd turbulence, where the density is so high that you're being pushed by others in the crowd unintentionally. There's a transfer of forces from one body to the next, and the forces end up, and that makes the situation quite uncontrollable. And I've predicted that that was also the reason for the Love Parade disaster, and later on we actually found those movies that show that there are those turbulent waves here. So they're the turbulent waves that actually destabilize the crowd and make people fall on top of each other. Now, of course, it's not acceptable for such things to happen, and for that reason the Saudi Arabian government has built a new Jamarat bridge some years ago, a 5-level structure with many more levels, more capacity, and different ramps leading to these different levels, and separate flows, and so on and so on. In this connection, I was asked to put together a team of international experts to help come up with suggestions. That then a Saudi Arabian expert team selected some of those proposals and decided what to do. One of the suggestions was actually to avoid crossing and counter flows. That means have a unidirectional organization of flows, and that has worked for many years quite safely, and the government was happy with the results, and there was also some late recognition last year for this. And then a crowd disaster happened in 2015, and I can show this to you because I've zero involvement in this. For 9 years I haven't been involved in any consultancy over there. That's been done by colleagues. And what happened at that time is that counterflows were actually allowed for. And that is actually the area where the accident happened. And that was done based on optimization. So last year there was a different team of people who've actually done the planning, and they were minimizing travel times, and that led to those opposite streams. And even the 5,000 CCTV cameras, I mean super surveillance, couldn't actually help to avoid this. So optimization is not the solution, as I said before, and instead we need to have a different approach. So we've also worked on traffic flows. We've been able to model the complexity of these flows with simple models, and understand actually what is going on. Even though there are so many different forms of congestion, we can actually understand and predict it. We can predict travel times and congestion, but we cannot predict the moment where congestion sets in. So now, by now we have an analytical theory of traffic congestion, and that actually helps to come up with proposals how to overcome congestion. So we have been working on mechanism design. That means automated driver assistance systems that are changing the interactions between successive cars. And in this way, it's actually possible to get rid of that congestion, even though not every car is actually equipped with such a system, right? So here's an example for, wait a moment, for how it works. So I start with a simulation of the annoying stop-and-go traffic that we still have today, and we've seen in that experiment before. And then later on, actually, we will turn on traffic assistance system that changes the interactions between cars based on measurements with a radar system. And what we'll see is that we will get rid of this congestion. So basically what we can say is self-organization will happen in complex systems. It doesn't necessarily produce desirable outcomes, but we can generate desirable outcomes by changing the interaction mechanism and the institutional settings. And actually that can be also applied to urban traffic, where we have actually been much more efficient than those state-of-the-art systems that are based on conventional optimization. And we're now applying the very same approach actually to socioeconomic systems. So what I'm saying is we can use mechanism design actually to improve the outcome of social and economic interactions. And what we basically need for this is scientific knowledge, as Nobel Prize winner Elinor Ostrom has actually produced it, but also devices that help us to take better decisions locally. That means improve our interaction with each other, with reputation systems. And so we can now build digital assistants. And we need the right kind of institutions to do this. And what I call digital democracy is one such kind of institution where basically the interactions between people are created in such a way that the knowledge and ideas of many minds are combined with each other to create better solutions using online deliberation platforms. And it turns out that diversity is highly important to come up with good solutions that work for many people. So it's really important to have this value pluralism and also to apply this balance of forces that is a basis of democracy in order to produce solutions that don't optimize the system just for one group of people, but that makes it work for many groups of people and create a flourishing, thriving economy. And in fact, now the institution that we are working on is a system that is now measuring the externalities between people and companies and the environment. And you can use smartphones and you can use external Internet of Things sensors to measure things collectively, such as noise or stress or pollution, but also positive things, and give it a price or a value. And then using this, you can actually pay people money for the data that they're creating and sharing with others, which would be the basis for this digital economy. So people could make money on producing those data, but at the same time we could create multidimensional markets that would create multidimensional incentive systems that allow to create those feedback loops that are needed to make self-organization work on many levels. So I'd like to say that now with this technology, combination of Internet of Things and blockchain technology and complexity science, we can now make the invisible hand work 300 years later and build a circular economy that can overcome those resource crises that are expected for the future. And so basically create incentives to recycle, to reuse waste and all these kind of things, and use the resources much more efficiently. In the same way we can produce incentives to be more cooperative, to support coordination, all of this. So basically my vision of how the society of the future, driven by information works, is a networked, well-coordinated, distributed system of largely autonomous systems. And I would say, yes, we should use big data, but it should be used in an open, participatory, and fair way. Yes, we should use artificial intelligence, but in a symbiotic and ethical way. Yes, we should use incentive systems, but in a multidimensional way. And yes, it's fine to create an operating system for society, but it should allow for creative freedom and innovation and for bottom-up opportunities. And we need a new socio-ecological kind of capitalism that can now be built in order to solve the problems of the future, and that capitalism would at the same time be democratic. So smart technologies alone won't create smart nations and cities. The combination of smart technologies and smart citizens creates smarter societies, and let's do that together. Thank you.